The moment Caitlin Clark spoke up about Stephanie White was like a subtle yet unmistakable shift in the atmosphere, a shift that carried weight, confidence, and a little slice of humor that only Caitlin could pull off. For anyone who has followed Clark's journey, it's clear she doesn't shy away from calling things like she sees them. What set this moment apart wasn't just the clarity in her words, but the layers beneath them, the hints of respect, understanding, and a bit of that classic Clark sharpness that's won her both fans and foes on the court. But before we proceed further, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. It's easy to look at Caitlin Clark and only see the fire in her game. The deep threes, the fearless drives to the basket, the pinpoint passes that slice defenses apart. She's earned every bit of praise and all the high fives from teammates. But off the court, when the spotlight isn't as bright and the stakes aren't quite as high, there's a quieter side to her, the one that observes and reflects. So when she spoke about Stephanie White, it was as much about Caitlin finding her voice in a new conversation as it was about acknowledging another basketball figure who's carved out her own place in the sport. Caitlin isn't typically known for lengthy interviews or deep dives into other people's careers. She's all about her own game, and that's where she prefers to channel her focus. But there's something about the story of Stephanie White that made Clark pause, reflect, and engage beyond the usual. It wasn't that she suddenly became a historian of women's basketball, but she seemed intrigued by the path White took, a path marked by resilience, adaptation, and, let's face it, a bit of that old-school grit that Clark has a soft spot for. When Caitlin spoke, there was a sense that she had done her homework, but not in an obvious way. It's more like she absorbed the nuances of White's career through the grapevine of the sport, piecing together a respect for what White accomplished as both a player and a coach. Maybe Clark sees a future reflection of herself in White, a reminder that today's players could very well become tomorrow's leaders on the sidelines. Or maybe it's just that White's style, no frills, all in, resonates with a young star like Clark, who is known to roll her eyes at pretense and lean into authenticity. Clark wasn't handing out compliments on a silver platter. That's not her style. Instead, she made observations, pointed ones, and laced them with an almost casual frankness. It's that blend of insight and dry humor that makes her voice both refreshing and occasionally a little intimidating. As she spoke, it felt like she was giving White a nod without a lot of frills, and somehow that carried more weight than any grand statement ever could. Stephanie White's career has been one of those slow burns, more a steady flame than a sudden, blinding flash. She built her legacy bit by bit, as a player who knew how to read the court and as a coach who adapted and pushed her teams to play their best game. It's the kind of legacy that probably doesn't get the headlines or the viral highlights, but for players like Caitlin Clark, who are already thinking beyond their playing days, it holds a different kind of meaning. It's a reminder that the game isn't just about what happens between the lines, it's about what you leave behind when the final buzzer sounds. There was a sense of relatability in Clark's words too, almost as if she saw in White's journey a reflection of her own ambitions. Maybe it's the way White transitioned from player to coach, taking the hard lessons learned on the court and turning them into strategies that shaped her teams. Clark seemed to recognize that adaptability, not as an abstract concept, but as a blueprint for how to stay relevant in a sport that's always evolving. Caitlin might not be thinking that far ahead. She's got plenty of basketball to play first, but there's a sense that she respects the long game, the idea of building a legacy that's more than just stats and accolades. Of course, it wasn't all reverence and reflection. Clark couldn't resist letting a little bit of her trademark humor slip through. It's in those moments, when she's not trying to be profound or polished, that Caitlin's personality really shines. She dropped a line or two that showed she's well aware of White's coaching style and wasn't afraid to poke a little fun at it, all in good spirit. It wasn't mocking. It was the kind of ribbing that suggests a level of comfort and mutual understanding, like when an up-and-coming player tries to mess with a veteran during practice just to see if they still have their chops. Caitlin's observations also spoke to the generational gap between herself and White, but not in a way that felt like an age divide. Instead, it came across as Caitlin embracing the idea that basketball isn't static. It's a sport passed down from one generation to the next, each one putting their own spin on it, and both she and White are part of that continuum. In her words, there was a hint of acknowledgement that while the game's styles may change, there's something timeless about how players and coaches relate to the sport and each other. For a player who's often seen as laser-focused on her own development, Caitlin's commentary on White showed a more observant side, one that appreciates the winding roads others have traveled to carve out their place in basketball. She didn't resent White as some distant figure, but as someone who had navigated challenges and found a way to stay true to herself while adapting to the demands of the game. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one, especially coming from a player like Clark who has her own fair share of battles to fight on and off the court. There's no doubt Caitlin Clark has a bit of an old soul when it comes to basketball. Her respect for the game's history and those who shaped it is palpable. It's clear she's not just in this for the highlights and accolades. She's thinking about what comes next, not just for herself, but for the sport. And maybe that's why Stephanie White's story resonated with her. White is a reminder that the game doesn't end when the playing days are over. It evolves, and so do the people who commit themselves to it. In a way, Caitlin's reflection on White felt like a passing of the torch, even if neither would frame it that way. Clark, with her youth and intensity, acknowledged White's steady, composed presence without needing to spell it out. It's that understanding of each other's place in the sport that carried weight, an unspoken recognition between two basketball minds who share a love for the game, albeit from different vantage points. It's easy to forget, given Caitlin Clark's confidence and assertiveness, that she's still relatively new to the public stage. Yet in these moments, when she shifts her focus outward and offers her take on someone else's journey, there's a glimpse of something deeper, an understanding that greatness isn't confined to just what happens on the court. Caitlin Clark, like the fans who watch her, is still figuring out what kind of legacy she wants to leave behind, and in reflecting on Stephanie White, she's taking notes from someone who's already walked that path with poise and purpose. The conversation between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White wasn't an actual dialogue, but there was a sense of exchange nonetheless. Clark's words were the kind of observations you'd expect from someone who's spent hours watching tape, dissecting not just the game but the stories behind the players and coaches. It's a mindset that bodes well for her future, both as a player and potentially beyond that. Whether she realizes it or not, she's already starting to think like a coach, seeing the game in layers and appreciating those who helped build it. Stephanie White might not have the immediate name recognition that some other figures in women's basketball do, but for Caitlin, it seemed that White's career was a reminder that impact isn't just about visibility. It's about consistency, resilience, and understanding your role, even when it shifts from the limelight to the sidelines. Caitlin's take on White wasn't grandiose, but it was perceptive, and in its simplicity, it carried more weight than any over-the-top praise ever could. In the end, Caitlin Clark didn't try to reinvent the wheel when she spoke about Stephanie White. She did what she does best, kept it real, threw in a touch of humor, and showed a respect that runs deeper than just admiration for White's achievements. It was a moment that gave a little glimpse into Caitlin's mindset, not just as a player, but as someone who's already thinking about the bigger picture, the legacy of the sport, and the people who paved the way. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content. We thrive on your feedback, so be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, keep discovering and stay tuned.